Before the mushroom clouds rose over Japan, there was another terror on the battlefield. A weapon so personal, so relentless, that even hardened soldiers whispered its name in fear. In the jungles of the Pacific, death didn't fall from the sky. It crawled toward you, burning everything in its path. The Pacific War was not fought on open plains or sweeping fronts. It was fought in shadows, in jungles so dense the sun itself seemed to struggle for ground. And in those shadows, the Imperial Japanese Army carried with them a belief system that made every inch of territory a place of death. For generations, the warrior code of Bushidō had shaped the Japanese military ethos, a philosophy that demanded loyalty, sacrifice, and an unbreakable resolve. But by the 1930s and 40s, it had evolved into something harsher: death before surrender. Captivity was considered shameful, survival after defeat dishonorable. Soldiers were instructed that retreat was not an option, mercy was weakness, and surrender was treason to the emperor. As the war dragged on, this mindset hardened into a doctrine of fanatic defense. Japanese troops dug into volcanic rock, hid in limestone caves, and fortified tunnel networks under jungles and coastlines. To them, every cave entrance was a gate to a final stand. Every bunker was a tomb willingly accepted. By 1943 and 1944, however, the reality behind the myth of invincibility had begun to fracture. Japan's once expanding empire was collapsing under the weight of its own overreach. Its merchant marine had been shredded by American submarines, its factories strained, and its armies spread thin across thousands of miles. Ammunition, food, medical supplies, all dwindled with each passing month. In stark contrast, American industrial output surged to a level the world had never seen. U.S. shipyards launched new vessels faster than Japan could sink them. Aircraft production soared. Entire marine divisions arrived in the Pacific equipped with fresh weapons, fuel, artillery, radios, and the confidence of a nation whose capacity seemed limitless. Yet none of this industrial power prepared them for the environment of the Pacific battlefields. On islands like Bougainville, Tarawa, Saipan, and Peleliu, Marines stepped into landscapes that felt almost alien. The humidity clung to their skin like a second uniform. The air never cooled. At night, darkness fell like a physical weight. A complete, suffocating blackout broken only by the buzz of insects and the distant echo of unseen movement. Paths were laced with booby traps, tripwires hidden beneath rotting leaves, sharpened bamboo stakes coated with dirt and infection, tunnels rigged with grenades. And somewhere ahead, sometimes a few yards, sometimes a few inches, an enemy waited, completely silent. Japanese defenders were masters of concealment. They fought from pillboxes carved into cliffs, from cave mouths nearly invisible behind tangled vines, from tunnels that ran for miles. Machine gun nests opened without warning. Mortar teams fired and vanished. Snipers disappeared into treetops and volcanic ridges, unseen until the first man in the patrol dropped. Marines learned quickly that in these environments, conventional weapons often failed. Bullets vanished into rock. Grenades barely scratched tunnel entrances. Flamethrowers, satchel charges, and demolition teams fought inch by inch just to clear a few feet of darkness. Each advance was slow. Each ridge, each valley, each cave mouth demanded lives. And deep within those suffocating labyrinths, in chambers hot enough to steal a man's breath, in tunnels so tight a Marine had to crawl on elbows, something else waited. Something the Japanese had prepared for their final, desperate stands. A weapon unlike anything most Americans had ever faced. A weapon that would soon redefine the terror of Pacific combat. Because in these underground worlds, a new hell weapon was about to dominate the war's most feared encounters. The Pacific War forced the United States to rethink warfare at its most fundamental level. Caves, tunnels, pillboxes, and concrete revetments. These were not obstacles that rifles or grenades could easily neutralize. By late 1943, American commanders realized that overcoming Japan's fanatical defensive networks would require a weapon capable of reaching where bullets could not. A weapon that could penetrate darkness, choke oxygen, and flush defenders from the very earth itself. The answer had existed in concept for decades, but never before had it been needed so urgently. The flamethrower. The earliest American battlefield models, the M1 and its refinement, the M1A1, were born from lessons in North Africa and early Pacific encounters. Their design was brutally simple. Twin cylindrical fuel tanks filled with thickened gasoline, a smaller tank of pressurized gas, and a wand-like projector capable of hurling fire across open ground. By 1944, continued combat experience led to the improved M2-2 flamethrower, the variant carried by Marines on Saipan, Tinian, Peleliu, and Iwo Jima. Yet, for all its destructive power, the flamethrower came with devastating trade-offs. Fully loaded, the unit weighed around 70 pounds, nearly half the weight of a Marine's entire combat load. Operators moved slowly, often struggling across mud, sand, and jagged coral. Their silhouettes stood out against the terrain, and the tanks on their backs became unmistakable targets. Japanese snipers, fully aware of the threat, were trained to prioritize flamethrower operators above all others. As one Marine later recalled, "If you stood up with those tanks, you felt every rifle on the island turn toward you." The danger wasn't only external. The weapon itself was volatile. A single well-placed bullet or fragmentation shard striking the fuel tanks could trigger an eruption. Operators were warned from day one. Your life expectancy in the open was measured in seconds. It took a rare blend of courage and discipline to volunteer for the role. Many did so knowing the risks, and still stepped forward. The U.S. Marine Corps quickly developed specialized flamethrower teams. They trained to move low, use terrain for cover, and coordinate with riflemen and engineers. Each operator worked closely with two assistants who carried extra fuel, ammunition, and rifles to protect them during the approach. The weapon demanded teamwork and absolute trust. But on the battlefield, the flamethrower proved to be more than just another tool for clearing caves or pillboxes. American commanders soon recognized its psychological impact. Against defenders taught to choose death over surrender, fire became one of the few forces capable of breaking resolve. The sight of flame pouring into tunnel mouths, rolling through trenches, or creeping across bunkers created a terror that no explosive could match. Combat reports from Tarawa and Saipan described how entire Japanese positions collapsed the moment fire touched their entrances. At Peleliu, Marines noted that flamethrowers forced defenders to flee through secondary openings, directly into pre-sighted rifle fire. The Japanese themselves acknowledged the devastation. Captured diaries spoke of the unbearable heat, the air itself burning, and the weapon that leaves no safe place. By the time the U.S. reached the volcanic shores of Iwo Jima in February 1945, the flamethrower had become indispensable. It was slow, dangerous, and carried by men who knew they were marked for death. Yet it was the only weapon that could reach into the labyrinths carved by the Japanese garrison. Its purpose had become both tactical and psychological, a force that shaped not only the battlefield, but the fears within it. And when tested against fortified Japanese positions, the results were terrifying. Across the islands of the Central Pacific, the rhythm of battle changed as Marines confronted an enemy who fought from beneath the earth. Nowhere did the struggle between flame and stone shape the war more than at Tarawa and Saipan, two turning points where the U.S. flamethrower proved both a tactical necessity and a psychological shock. When the 2nd Marine Division stormed Bushidō Island at Tarawa in November 1943, they walked directly into one of the most fortified square miles in the world. Japanese engineers had transformed the coral atoll into a maze of concrete bunkers and concealed gun positions, each reinforced with steel and sand. Many of these pillboxes were interconnected, allowing defenders to shift positions, reman guns, and fire from angles the Marines could barely detect. Grenades, rifle fire, and satchel charges often failed to suppress these nests. Machine gun barrels stayed hot. Mortars continued firing through tiny apertures. The Marines soon realized that only one weapon could reach inside and neutralize the defenders hiding deep behind layers of concrete and coral. Flamethrower operators were pushed to the front. Their streams of burning fuel curled into firing slits, flowed along trench lines, and ignited the wooden supports inside bunkers. Japanese troops who had held out against hours of shelling broke within seconds of fire flooding their positions. After the battle, Marines found scorched gun barrels still locked into firing ports, a final testament to how fiercely the defenders had fought, and how impossible their tunnels were to clear without flame. The next summer, flame met stone again on Saipan. When the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions and the U.S. Army's 27th Infantry Division landed in June 1944, they encountered Japanese forces entrenched in volcanic cliffs, ravines, and networks of natural caves. Unlike Tarawa's flat terrain, Saipan's interior was a fortress built by nature itself, dark, jagged, and virtually impregnable. Here, flamethrowers became indispensable. Japanese troops fought with the same uncompromising tenacity that had become a hallmark of the Pacific War. They used cave systems to disappear after firing, reappear in unexpected places, and launch sudden close-quarters attacks. Marines advancing into the ravines near Mount Tapasho found enemy defenders hidden behind rocks, in crevices, and at the bottom of sinkholes where grenades simply rolled off into the abyss. Flamethrower operators crawled forward, often under sniper fire, and poured fire into these spaces. The effect was immediate and devastating. Flames chased oxygen through narrow passages, turning caves into infernos. Defenders ran from openings, gasping for air, only to be met by rifles and machine guns covering the exits. To Japanese soldiers, this was a horror beyond comprehension. Unlike artillery or aerial bombs, weapons too distant to grasp, too abstract to fear, the flamethrower was intimate. It appeared suddenly, at the distance of a few yards, wielded by a single Marine whose silhouette meant death. There was no way to deflect it, no armor to stop it, no honorable death to meet it. In Japanese spiritual belief, dying by fire risked the destruction of the body before proper burial rites could be performed, condemning the soul to restlessness. Flames did not just kill, they erased. One Japanese survivor later wrote, "In the caves, there was no air, only fire. We could not breathe. Those who burned had no faces left." The caves of Saipan became graves of darkness and flame, a brutal revelation of how the war in the Pacific would be fought to the very end. In the Pacific, the flamethrower operator carried a burden heavier than the 70-pound tanks strapped to his back. He carried the knowledge that once he stepped forward, the battlefield changed. Even in official after-action reports, Marines wrote that flamethrower duty was the job no one wanted, and the one everyone depended on. Advancing under fire was an exercise in controlled terror. Operators moved low, crawling through sand, volcanic ash, or razor-sharp coral. Riflemen spread out on both sides, guarding every step, because the enemy knew exactly who to kill first. Snipers watched for the glint of the fuel wand or the curved outline of the twin tanks. A single hit could end not just the operator's life, but the lives of anyone nearby. Yet the operators continued forward. Their mission was to reach the cave entrance or pillbox slit. Nothing else mattered. Inside those caves, the experience was even more nightmarish. Marines recorded the moment flame met darkness. The roar of ignited fuel echoing like thunder, smoke rolling back out in choking waves, the air vibrating with heat so intense it could blister skin from 10 feet away. Temperatures inside confined spaces often reached 1,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to char rock and consume oxygen almost instantly. Japanese defenders trapped inside faced a fate beyond imagination. For many, there was no corridor to retreat through, no alternate exit, no relief from the advancing fire. The thick smoke blinded them. The sudden vacuum robbed their lungs of air before the flames even touched them. Diaries recovered after battles described how some soldiers tried to bury their faces in the dirt to breathe, only to find the earth itself burning. From outside, Marines sometimes heard what happened next. Countless after-action testimonies described the same haunting moment, the screams echoing from deep within the caves. Some were short, cut off by smoke. Others were long, reverberating until the flames consumed the very air carrying the sound. It was a horror that left a permanent mark on those who heard it. One Marine on Saipan wrote, "You do not forget that sound. You can't." For the Japanese, there was an added spiritual terror. Fire did not just kill, it destroyed the body beyond recognition. In traditional belief, a soldier denied burial rites risked a restless afterlife. Many chose suicide charges rather than face the flame. But inside a sealed cave, choice disappeared. The moral weight of this weapon did not spare the Americans who used it. Marines openly admitted their hatred for flamethrowers, not because they doubted their effectiveness, but because they understood the brutality. Operators later said they felt a mixture of fear, dread, and grim resolve every time they pulled the trigger. They knew what the fire would do. They knew what it meant. And yet, the weapon saved American lives. It cleared tunnels that would have required countless men to storm by hand. It neutralized ambush positions that had already taken dozens of casualties. In the calculus of survival, flame became the only option. But survival came at a cost. Every operator understood a truth they rarely spoke aloud. Once you pull the trigger, there is no clean victory. Iwo Jima was unlike any battlefield the Marines had ever seen. A black volcanic fortress rising from the Pacific, its surface was a wasteland of ash, sulfur fumes, and jagged rock. Beneath that hostile landscape lay the true battlefield. A vast network of 11 miles of tunnel, bunkers, galleries, and hidden firing chambers carved by General Tadamaki Korebayashi's engineers. Nearly 20,000 Japanese defenders waited inside this subterranean world, determined to bleed the American invasion dry. When the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions landed on February 19, 1945, they encountered almost nothing on the surface. No massed counterattacks. No visible defensive lines. The Japanese had vanished underground, waiting to strike the moment the beaches were filled with men and equipment. And when they opened fire, the island erupted with machine guns, mortars, and artillery from invisible positions. The Marines quickly learned that Iwo Jima could not be taken by explosives alone. Shells detonated harmlessly against the thick volcanic rock. Grenades rolled into tunnels and vanished into endless chambers. Even naval bombardment, the heaviest of the Pacific War, failed to collapse more than a handful of positions. To root out the defenders, the Americans would need fire. Flamethrower operators advanced across the island's slopes, but the sheer size of Korebayashi's fortress demanded a new level of destructive power. The solution rolled ashore in the form of armored steel. M4A3 are 3 flamethrower tanks, nicknamed Ronsons, after the cigarette lighter advertised to light every time. Equipped with mechanized flamethrower units, these tanks could project a jet of burning fuel out to 150 feet, far beyond the reach of a man-portable flamethrower. For Marines fighting among ridges like Turkey Knob, Hill 362, and the caves of the Motoyama Plateau, the sight of a Ronson clearing a position was unforgettable. Flames surged in massive arcs, clinging to rock walls, flowing into cave mouths, and rolling back out in pillars of smoke. Entire tunnel entrances glowed red as the fire swept through them. Japanese soldiers who had survived weeks of bombardment understood instantly that nothing in their defenses, not steel, not distance, not discipline, could stop this weapon. Inside the tunnels, chaos reigned. Thick smoke consumed oxygen. Temperatures soared. Those who survived the first blast of flame staggered deeper into the mountain, unable to see, unable to breathe. In diaries recovered after the battle, defenders described the flamethrower as the weapon of the devil, a force beyond anything they had trained to resist. One officer wrote, "The heat comes like a wave. The air disappears. Men fall without a sound." Flamethrower units, both infantry and armored, played a decisive role in clearing hundreds of positions that conventional weapons could not. Marine reports noted that flame tanks destroyed or sealed more than 600 cave and pillbox positions, accelerating the collapse of organized resistance on the northern half of the island. Yet the cost was staggering. Iwo Jima became the only battle in Marine Corps history where American casualties exceeded Japanese casualties. For those trapped inside the volcanic labyrinth, the flamethrower represented something far worse than defeat. In a culture where dying in battle carried honor, fire offered no dignity, only annihilation. To the Japanese defenders, the flamethrower wasn't just a weapon. It was the death they feared above all others. Fear on the battlefield is never abstract. It has weight, shape, sound. And during the Pacific War, Few weapons embodied that fear more completely than the U.S. flamethrower. Its power was not only in the destruction it unleashed, but in the terror it created long before its first burst of fire ever hit the air. For Japanese soldiers trained under the strict warrior code of Bushidō, death in battle was expected, even embraced, if it came with honor. A bullet, a bayonet, an artillery shell, these were acceptable endings. But the flamethrower offered no such dignity. It promised a fate that stripped away every element of the warrior ideal. No clean death, no recognizable remains, no possibility of burial or remembrance. It erased a man completely: body, identity, legacy. And that psychological devastation began long before the flames reached their target. U.S. Marines reported how, during assaults on cave systems in Saipan, Peleliu, and Iwo Jima, the moment a flamethrower operator stepped forward, the battlefield changed. The weapon was slow, heavy, unmistakable. A tank strapped to a man's back, with a long nozzle that looked like a torch from some medieval nightmare. This approach was visible, deliberate, inevitable. Even hidden defenders, buried deep inside volcanic tunnels or concrete pillboxes, could hear it. The metallic rattle of the igniter, the hiss of pressurizing fuel. For many, terror set in before a single spark ignited. One Marine on Iwo Jima later wrote, "You didn't have to see the fire. You could feel the fear when the flamethrower came forward." The Japanese knew what was coming, and sometimes you could hear them shouting in panic. Inside those caves, the effect was even more overwhelming. Flames are unpredictable. They bend, cling, crawl, and seek out every pocket of air. The Japanese defenders understood this all too well. A machine gun could be dodged. Artillery required line of sight. But the flamethrower rendered terrain useless. It reached around corners, under rocks, behind barriers, and down tunnels where no bullet could reach. Even a perfectly designed defensive position, something the Japanese military excelled at, offered no real protection. The psychological strain was devastating. A soldier on Saipan recalled, "We feared tanks and bombs, but nothing filled the men with madness like the flamethrower. Came for every hiding place. There was nowhere left to be brave." For U.S. forces, this fear worked to their advantage, but it came with its own weight. Flamethrower operators knew they were targets. They carried volatile fuel tanks on their backs. They felt every enemy rifle turn toward them the moment they lifted their nozzle. Some Marines admitted that the screams and chaos after a burst of fire stayed with them long after the battle ended. The weapon was brutal, effective, and unforgettable. And as Japanese visibility of the flames' aftermath spread across the Pacific Islands, the psychological impact multiplied. Soldiers sent to reinforce positions already hit by flamethrowers often found nothing recognizable. Only blackened stone, melted metal, and ash. There were no bodies to bury, no comrades to honor, no way to perform last rites. Under Bushidō, this wasn't just death, it was annihilation. A spiritual erasure. By late 1944, intelligence snippets and prisoner interrogations revealed a sobering pattern. Entire units abandoned strong points at the mere rumor that American assault teams were approaching with flamethrowers. Walls could be rebuilt. Guns could be replaced. But morale, once burned away, rarely returned. And as Japan's defenses crumbled, one terrible truth emerged. Fear itself became a weapon. For the soldiers entrenched in the Pacific Islands, the atomic bomb was a concept almost beyond comprehension. Cut off from Japan's central command, isolated in caves and jungle outposts, most Japanese troops never learned of Hiroshima or Nagasaki until the war had already ended. Radios were scarce, supply lines destroyed, and communication networks severed. They fought, day after day, without knowledge of the new weapon that would soon end the empire. To them, the destruction of Hiroshima was indistinguishable from the firebombing of Tokyo, which had already killed tens of thousands. Cities were consumed by flames. Entire neighborhoods turned to ash. Yet these were distant, abstract horrors. For the men on the front lines, survival depended not on anticipating nuclear devastation, but on confronting the immediate, tangible inferno of American assault. Flamethrowers, deployed inch by inch, cave by cave, shaped their reality. The heat, smoke, and fire were unavoidable. They could see it. They could smell it. They could hear the screams echoing from the tunnels and bunkers where men had taken their final stand. This was a terror that demanded instantaneous reaction. A direct, intimate confrontation with death that left no room for retreat, no hope for mercy. Unlike bombs dropped from the sky, the flamethrower was personal, immediate, and devastatingly effective. In battles across Saipan, Peleliu, and Iwo Jima, Marines and flame tanks reduced hundreds of fortified positions that conventional artillery could not touch. Japanese soldiers, trained in Bushidō and fanatical defense, faced a new type of psychological warfare. The atomic bomb would break their nation. The flamethrower broke their will, one claustrophobic chamber at a time. Survivors described it as a weapon that comes from the shadows, that sees into every hiding place, and leaves nothing to honor or bury. The irony was stark. While historians would later debate the political and strategic necessity of the atomic bomb, the men living it experienced an entirely different reality. Their hell was not a mushroom cloud on the horizon, but the roaring jet of flame at 15, 10, even 5 yards away. It was in the tunnels and caves, in the suffocating smoke, in the heat that peeled the air from their lungs. To the men inside those caves, hell didn't come from the sky. It came from 15 yards away. By the end of World War II, the flamethrower had earned a reputation few weapons could match. Across the Pacific, from the coral atolls of Tarawa to the volcanic heights of Iwo Jima, it had turned impossible positions into conquered ground. Bunkers, caves, pillboxes, structures that had repelled artillery and infantry alike, succumbed to the terrifying intimacy of fire. Its effectiveness was measured not only in the positions cleared, but in the lives saved. Marines moving through labyrinthine tunnels could advance where riflemen and grenadiers would have been slaughtered, and entire campaigns were shortened because the weapon allowed forces to neutralize defenses without costly frontal assaults. Yet the flamethrower's legacy was as psychological as it was tactical. For Japanese soldiers trained under Bushidō, it represented a violation of every expectation of honorable combat. Death in battle was supposed to be swift, courageous, dignified. The flamethrower denied all of these. It forced men to confront not just their mortality, but the destruction of their bodies and the erasure of the rituals that gave death meaning. After the war, military analysts and historians noted its profound effect on morale. The fear it instilled lingered long after the campaigns ended. The weapon reshaped how future conflicts would consider psychological impact as part of warfare, introducing a new paradigm where terror could be engineered with precision, not just chance. For the men who wielded it, the moral complexity was inescapable. Many Marines volunteered knowing the danger, carrying 70 pounds of pressurized fuel across enemy fire, often under sniper threat. Yet they also faced the haunting consequences of their own actions. Flamethrower operators saved lives, but the screams, the smoke, the suffocating heat, the unrecognizable remains, these remained indelible scars. In interviews years later, veterans described it as both a tool of necessity and a burden on the conscience, a weapon they respected for its effectiveness but hated for the cost it demanded. After the war, flamethrowers became symbols of brutality. Their use in Korea and Vietnam would be far more limited, and by the 1970s, the U.S. military gradually phased them out, leaving behind manuals, photographs, and memories. The weapon's final legacy was a paradox. It had been indispensable to victory, yet morally troubling to those who carried it. It reshaped battles, defined the terror of the Pacific, and left a mark on the ethics of combat that endured long after the war's end. In the quiet aftermath, historians and soldiers alike reflected on its haunting presence. In a conflict dominated by unimaginable technologies, from aircraft carriers to nuclear weapons, it was not the distant flash of an atomic sun that had most profoundly shaped the fear of a generation. It was something far closer, far slower, and far more intimate: the crawling, engulfing fire that lit the darkest corners of the Pacific War.